Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Midnight Hellish Expectations, out March 8th on Metal Blade Records. The album has 10 tracks, 26 minutes in length, and this is the band's 6th full-length studio album. They are an American black speed metal band. Now this album comes at you fast and faster, and that speed really impacts the structure, the design, and the experience of the record. A design that is very dynamic, very fluid, always forward looking, with a sense of direction and a sense of intent in terms of what it wants to offer and where it wants to take the listener. The overall design of this record is just a pure representation of the sound that the record holds. A sound that I felt was a lot more rock and roll and a lot less blackened. It still obviously has the speed metal elements into it, but it goes a little bit deeper into the roots of the band, and it comes forward with a more pure rock and roll sound that obviously lives off of the guitars predominantly, but it has assistance and help from the other elements like drums and bass. And when you talk about the sound on this album being very rock and roll based, you can also feel it because it's an album that has grit, that has distortion in the right place, creating a sense of a wall of sound, but a not well-defined wall of sound. It's you know what's there, you know what makes the wall, but you're not really able to see the edges of that wall. And that becomes a common denominator sound-wise throughout this entire record. The guitars offering that grit, offering that distortion, pairing up with the drums and bass in order to create, like I said, this wall of sound that's really hard to tell exactly what the shape is. But it has this sense of movement, it has this sense of thickness, and with that comes a sense of heaviness. But it's a sense of heaviness that takes nothing away from that pure, more pure rock and roll sound that really comes to the forefront. And you see that rock and roll sound also on the guitar side when it comes to the solos, and then when it comes to the more melodic riffs that this album carries. Both of them come across differently. They break away from that wall of sound, they break away from that thickness and from that grit, and are a little bit more driven, they are a little bit more direct, and they are a little bit more clear. And that aspect allows the guitar sound throughout the entire album to have this duality that gives life to the record and allows the album to have ebbs and flows, even though movement-wise it feels very linear sonically from start to finish. It's a really important element that adds texture and character to the sound, to the record, and obviously to the individual songs. And while the guitar sound is the main protagonist, outside of the vocals, obviously the main protagonist of this record, you have to talk about the drums because they play such an important role on an album like this, because they have a nice substance to it, they have a nice oomph to it, they're not overpowering, they also have a rock and roll feel to them, so they compensate some gaps and they allow the sound to feel like it has a little bit more depth to it, not allowing the sound to be just about that grit that you get, but also something behind that grit that pushes it forward. So it has an impact on the experience, on the record, obviously on the sound, but it's a subtle impact, but an impact that's important nevertheless. Then when it comes to the vocals, that's perhaps the only element that has that ability to bring that black metal experience, that black and roll, if you will, into the forefront, matching obviously really well with the speed, with the aggression, with the darkness that the album has. The vocals are consistent, the vocals are what you would expect from a Midnight record, nothing changes there. That stays very close to home and allows the record to stay also very balanced from that standpoint. All around, it really feels like an album that took a step back in terms of getting rid of some extras that were needed when it comes to this band. This band is about to provide, in my humble opinion, is about providing a sound that connects with the live experience. When you go see Midnight, you feel like you're watching a live performance of what you just heard on the record. At least that was my experience every time that I've seen them. And this album captures that a lot better than the previous record. It's a more no frills, it's a more down in the ground, it's a more live record recorded in the studio with all the bits, with all the imperfections that come along with that. And that brings character to the album, that brings character to the sound, and in my opinion makes this a much better record than its predecessor. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Expect Total Hell. This is the opening track, and what a great opening track. I mean, if you're pressing play on a Midnight record and the first song is Expect Total Hell, I think that's what you were expecting coming in anyways. So this song definitely delivers on its title. It's relentless as far as the riffing is concerned. It has that heavy, gritty sound that blends in with a more melodic guitar driven sound, so it creates this this duality, and it creates space between the two, and then they also merge as one another because one cuts through the other, and this creates movement to a song that already has its own natural tempo and its own natural movement. It's a great track from that standpoint, taking you all the way from the verses to a super catchy chorus, which is always a staple with Midnight. A fine way of creating songs that are simple, direct, but super catchy and super hooky. This one is no different, and I really enjoy this connection between the grittier side of the sound and the more melodic, the more crisp, the more driven side of the guitars. That duality starts to take hold, and that simplicity of sound starts to take hold right from the first song, and then it becomes the trademark that really carries you through all other 9 tracks. And another favorite of mine is Slave of the Blade. Now this one is not as gritty and definitely not as thick, and I would go as far as to say not as heavy as Expect Total Hell. This is a more rock and roll bass riff style track. It has high octane, it has high energy, great melody built in, the drums offer outstanding consistency. It's a simple song, it's a pure rock and roll, simple style song with a great catchy hooky chorus. It has a great riff, it has a great sound as it moves into the chorus, great movement. It's a track that when you're listening to it, it feels like an Elvis song. It feels like a rock and roll Elvis song just taken to a different place and becoming a little bit of something else. But the origins of this song really feels to me like a pure Elvis rock and roll track in terms of how the verses work, how the chorus work, the guitar sound, how the guitar surrounds itself or surrounds the chorus with these more melodic riffs, these more driven, pure rock and roll riffs that break apart from the song, that give it its own identity. I think that's really important on a track like this, simplifying, bringing it back to the roots, and creating a very interesting, catchy, hooky, and still dark song nevertheless. Last but not least, Mercyless Slaughter. Now this track is one of the ones, when I said earlier that this album moves fast and faster, this is one that moves fast because it slows down from what you expect, and it slows down in comparison to some of the tracks that comes before and some of the tracks that come after. Now that slowing down, or there's slight decrease in speed I should say, allows the track to sound and feel heavier. It's a track that feels like it has a little bit more within it. It has more volume within it, if you will. And the vocals are the ones that infuse the aggression, the intensity, the darkness. It's really important to have that element still there, because what you're losing in terms of the tempo, in terms of the speed, is injected in by the vocal performance and how it comes across and how it interacts with the rest of the track. It has an outstanding solo. One of my favorite solos is on this track. It feels like one of the most exuberant ones of the record, and it matches well, because if you think about this track is not as exuberant as some of the other songs, but the solo is. So there's condiments in this track that give you a feel of what the rest of the album is all about, while sonically this track is a little bit slower than most of the songs on the entire album. So really interesting dynamic on creating a track that feels very balanced with the record, but it changes the condiments, or changes who the main characters are, and in terms of what they're doing within the song structure, within the song design. This is it, Midnight Hellish Expectations, out March 8th on Metal Blade Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Hit me up in the comment section, and I'll see you all at the next video. Take care, guys.